You mentioned Robin DiAngelo. She's the author of that New York Times bestselling book, White Fragility. That there is a white woman that leads the way in telling white people how they should be dealing with people of color. That to me was the biggest irony of all. That there's a woman who's making boatloads of money basically saying, I'm going to tell you what black people think. I mean, of all of the ironies, I thought that was one of the greatest.
And it is. And if you point that out to these people or to Robin DiAngelo herself, which I did, she's very ready to kind of acknowledge that in a performative way. And so then you'll get the whole, oh, well, of course, I'm the worst of them all. I have the most to learn. So it becomes this opportunity for this performative humility, which I think for the white people that are in this grift, that's a lot of what they get out. I mean, aside from the money, they also get, it's kind of a classic, it's like the hypocrisy that Jesus warned about in the Gospels, the kind of performative going around, sort of self-flagellating, I'm the greatest sinner of all, and where you almost take a perverse pleasure in it. And it's kind of like that, but the DEI version.
You've brought up money a couple times, and it was interesting watching the film. How many times somebody said, yes, Matt, I will engage, I will talk to you about this, but here's what it's going to cost you.
Yeah, that's why when we're making the film, we made the decision early on that we're going to be transparent about it. We're going to make this part of the story. The fact that we had to pay these people to be in the film is very much a part of the story. And we kind of knew that as we were going through it. So when we were getting quoted these kind of absurdly high price tags, we said, all right, we'll pay it. But this is part of the story. And you would think that, this is what they do for a living. So they want to get paid for it. Okay. But you would also think that if you really care about racism and anti-racism and somebody just wants to talk to you about it, that you would talk about it and you would use that as an opportunity to, reach whatever their audience is, and you wouldn't necessarily need to get paid for it. I don't know. I mean, I've done many interviews in my time, and I've never asked to be paid for one. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that's true. For the audience, Matt, we offered him a ton of money. He said no. But it was fascinating because these people, to your point, I get asked all the time to talk about conservative issues or thought about from the right or perspective is from the Trump world. I want people to understand us. I want the movement to grow. And yet it seems like these guys, it's only about the money. In each case, it's as long as you pay me, then I'll talk about it.
And I think that's also why when people wonder, of course, well, why did they show up? Why didn't they leave? Why did they go along with it? How did you get them to stay and talk to you? We get that question all the time. And this is, I think, a big part of the answer is exactly what we're talking about here, that they had the dollar signs in their eyes and they wanted the money, and probably they were willing to overlook things that otherwise they would see as a red flag. I mean, it's interesting that Robin DiAngelo, for example, she put out a statement on her website right before the premiere of the film, denouncing the film and claiming that she was tricked and all this kind of stuff. But she says in her statement, she claims that when she sat down for the interview, that she could tell that, according to her, the interviewer, who would be me, was wearing an ill-fitting wig in her description. Now, number one, I think the wig was I think it's a very nice wig. And
it is very nice.
Thank you. So don't besmirch the dignity of the wig. But second, if you could tell that, then why didn't you get up and leave right away? I mean, if I came in for an interview and I could tell it's like the guy's wearing a costume, I'd probably get up and leave. So I don't know if just this is her after the fact claiming that to try to save face, or if she wanted the money that badly that she was actually willing to sit there, even though she could, according to her, like sniff out that things were not as they seemed.
But the thing that's fascinating about that argument, and again, I'll leave it to the audience, is it was one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. I will just leave it at that. I don't want to give away too much. That's your discretion how much you want to give away. But I would argue that it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. This interaction with Robin DiAngelo, the best-selling author of this book about how we all need to understand our whiteness and the inherent racism that exists, is there's nothing in it where you tricked her. You didn't lie to her. You asked her a series of logical questions. And I will suffice it to say she tied herself up in knots. So if she's embarrassed, it's on her. It's not like you had her get up and do like aerobics and tie her in knots and do something silly or dress up. You just literally took her down a series of logical questions that, suffice it to say, I don't think she did a good job of answering.
Look, we didn't force anyone to do anything. Obviously, nobody had a gun to their head. And I certainly don't think that trick is the right word either, even though they're using that word. And, there's been some media coverage that is using that word. But at any point, like if anyone embarrassed, I guess this is the point. If anyone comes away from the movie embarrassed, if they feel embarrassed, well, they embarrassed themselves. It's because they answered in a way that they chose to answer. They didn't have to answer that. And if they, I don't want to, right, even though it's been reported, I don't like doing spoilers, but if Robin DiAngelo, participated in certain exercises, let's say, during that interview that she wishes she hadn't, well, that was her own choice. And at any point she could have said, hey, this is ridiculous. I'm not going along with this, and shut it down, gotten up and left. But she didn't. And that's because some of the money had something to do with it, but also, all we were trying to do was take their own logic, their own arguments, their own worldview, and kind of present it back to them. And I think it put them in kind of sort of the sort of lose-lose situation that they present for everybody else most of the time.
So beyond Robin DiAngelo and some of the people that made fools of themselves in the movie, and I think they made fools of themselves is actually the right phrase, because in each instance, I really loved your line of questioning. I think you do a phenomenal job of asking questions. I've always said to people, I really study interviews and how people ask, and admire people that can ask good, probative questions in a way that gets the subject to answer in an illustrative way, so that you're not just getting a canned answer, if you will. And I love the way that you asked each of these subjects a very logical question about what they believed and why, and tried to figure out where they'd go with it. So I understand why they look like fools in many cases, but beyond that, what has been the reaction specifically of Black people who have seen the movie? Do they find some of the people that do what they do in this movie in terms of try to preach DEI, do they say that doesn't represent me? What has been that reaction?
It's been interesting from the Black audience for the film. First of all, this is according even to the media reports, and I honestly don't know how they figure out the demographics for this, but there have been reports, I think it was Variety that had one, that the movie has a diverse audience, and it's not just white conservatives going to see it as much as the left would like to tell themselves that. That's not the case. And there's that. There's the kind of whatever data that they have on this stuff. But then anecdotally, as you can imagine, I've gotten a lot of feedback on the movie. I've heard from a lot of people, and I don't know. I'm sure they're out there, but I've yet to hear from a Black person who saw the movie and came away and thought it was racist or was offended. I honestly have not gotten that reaction one time yet.
And I can see why, but have they said, I don't like these charlatans? Like, that's what I came away from thinking. Like, you mentioned Jesus and the Gospels, and I kept thinking, around Lent, he talks to us about this a lot, about how we should act. And I was thinking, like, if I'd be pissed to see people depict, people of my culture and say, this is what they're really like, and this is how you should atone or whatever. And I'm intrigued, genuinely intrigued, because if I saw that movie as a person of color, I'd say, I don't like how these people are taking advantage of a situation that our society is grappling with.
Yeah, that has very much been the feedback. Black and white audiences, actually, that's one of the main takeaways, is that these grifters and kind of resent the things that they're saying, because whether if you're a Black person, you hear what the grifters are saying. I certainly would resent being painted as this kind of helpless, infantilized victim. which is what you get if you're not a white person. That's the way you're portrayed by the DEI grifters. And then, of course, on the other hand, I know as a white person, as a straight white male, the worst of all, I know that what we hear is that we're the villains and we're being constantly demonized. But in both cases, and I've said this before, that I don't like being demonized. I'm not a big fan of it. I prefer if I wasn't. But I actually prefer that. I'd prefer to be demonized than to be infantilized and told that I'm a victim.
Yeah.
And told that I have no agency over my own life. So I think that in many ways, in terms of the narrative, you get kind of the shorter end of the stick there. I would rather you tell me, oh, you're an evil, terrible person, and just leave it at that. When you tell me that, you have no control over your life and everything that's happened to you, it's because of this and this and this, and you need all these systemic changes so that you can, that is the ultimate demoralizing message. And I think that that's what the audience generally is taking away from it. And that's why this movie, it kind of cuts across racial lines, but even political lines. I mean, I've again, this is anecdotal, but I've heard from many people who say that they are Democrat, they vote Democrat, they're liberal, self-described, not fans of mine, don't like me, but are distraught to have to report that they actually like the movie, because I think even they are looking at this and saying, hey, well, like, they don't want to align themselves with Robin DiAngelo, and so they want to be able to say that that's not us, that's not what we stand for. Now, I actually think, though, that Robin DiAngelo is, I can see why if you're on the left, you'd want to disown her, but I think, unfortunately for them, that she does represent their worldview, in fact. But either way, it's been interesting to see the demographics.
The thing that I find fascinating about their worldview, if you truly believe that racism is a major systemic problem in our society, like any other problem, you should be trying to figure out how to solve it, right? How do we end this problem, end this epidemic, end this whatever? I mean, sickness. I mean, like in each case, when you are somebody that's out there trying to end something, a sickness, an epidemic, whatever it is, your goal is to eradicate it, to solve it. And what I find about the folks in the movie is that they don't want it solved. They want you to say, unfortunately, you'll always be sick. We can't help you. And so that's it. Whereas if I actually really wanted to solve racism, I would say, okay, what are the steps that can be taken in society, not which will allow it to perpetually be a problem? And that's what I think is so fascinating about this. If you're on the left, as you point out, I would want somebody to say, here's the problem. Here's how we are going to solve it and end it so it doesn't occur anymore or is eradicated, et cetera, whatever that problem is. And I find that the people that you encounter in the movie at heart don't want it to go away. They need it to go on.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. That's why we kind of say at the end of the movie, there's a little, I have my speech that I give at the very end. It's tongue in cheek, obviously, but the message there is actually what I think. And we say in there that, they're selling us a disease and telling us there's no cure. And it's exactly what you just said, that it's kind of like, well, they want to, if racism is a disease in this analogy, then they want to manage the symptoms, let's say. They don't want to cure it, because if they cure it, then you're not going back to them. But if it's a disease that you're kind of then you have to keep going back to them for more treatment. Now, it is true that racism as a societal issue is never going to be solved in the sense of eradicating racism from the hearts of human beings forever. That's not going to happen. There's always going to be racism, just like there's always going to be, hatred, envy, spite, all these negative human emotions will always be out there in the world. But on an individual basis, it is possible for a person to just not be racist. Like that's a possible thing to achieve. And I think actually most people in America have achieved that with basically no effort. But that ultimately is what the DEI grifters don't want anyone to know. They don't want you to know that about yourself. They don't want you to know that you aren't racist. They want to convince you that you are, so that they can then sell you the treatment plan.
Yeah. The weekend that it came out in theaters, you posted on your Twitter feed that several theater workers, I don't think they were the owners, the workers, we're trying to figure out how to dissuade people from going or making it very difficult for them to buy tickets. Despite that, this is what the Hollywood Reporter, no friend to conservatives, wrote in their publication. Matt Walsh's much talked about documentary, Am I Racist?, placed 7th in its second outing with $2.5 million from 1,600 locations for a domestic tally of $9 million, the best showing for a political doc in 2 decades. In 2 decades. What does that say to you?
I think it says a lot of things. I think that the biggest thing is that there's obviously a real appetite, in the culture for this kind of content. And we're not the first, at the Daily Wire, we're obviously not the first people to figure that out. And there have been others. I mean, Angel Studios puts out a lot of great films and is, also tapping into an audience that is underserved. But it's all part of that same message. And I also think that it's not just creating content for an audience that is often ignored, but also putting that content in places like theaters. And there's there's the audience there, and they want to go support it. And it also tells us, more broadly speaking, that, and I hope this is one of the main takeaways for the film, aside from the actual message of the film itself, is that, as conservatives, we are not fighting the culture war at all if we are not creating art and
Yes.
art, films, shows, music, anything. Those are all art forms, obviously. And if we're not doing that, if we're not in that game, then we're really not fighting the culture war at all, because art is what shapes the culture. And for too long, I think conservatives have, with a few exceptions, have kind of put up their hands and said, well, we don't need to do this. And we've done a lot of commentary and that kind of thing. And I have a daily podcast where I do commentary. So I think there's obviously value in that. But you've got this is how you shape the culture. Commenting on culture and pointing out the problems is important. We do that. That's good. But the shaping of what the culture is itself is done through art. So
just walk me through the business decision. You had a very large degree of success with What Is a Woman. You go do this. What was the decision to put this in theaters? I don't know what kind of budget you guys had behind this, because to get this kind of success, the most successful showing for a political doc in 2 decades, is a pretty big deal. What was the commitment of the Daily Wire? Was it, hey guys, we got to do this, we got to throw mud at the wall and see what sticks, or why was it this movie that you guys felt was worth going the distance on and getting it in theaters and putting real money behind it?
Yeah, well, it was a major commitment from the Daily Wire and a major investment and a major risk. I mean, let's be honest about it, because if documentaries in particular historically do not perform well at the box office. People just don't. Now, millions of people go and watch documentaries, but they generally don't go to the theaters to see them. They wait till they're available, at home. And that's also what we ran into when we first approached theaters about it. We thought that maybe they'd be nervous about the content. They actually weren't really. They were nervous about what the genre. And so we had to kind of prove to them there's an audience through pre-sale tickets, and we expanded theaters up to 1,500 or 1,600. So there's a real risk involved. And usually with documentaries, if you get them in theaters, they're there. They don't chart at all. They make a few $1,000 or whatever, and then they're gone. And if that were to happen, then hey, I mean, it's not the word. It happens to documentaries all the time, so we'd be in good company. But that's kind of a failure. There's a scoreboard now, and people can see it, and they can see that you didn't put any points on it. And so there's kind of that PR branding risk, which is substantial, and then there's all the money you lose on top of it. So. But the reason we decided to do it is that we all believed in the film, and we also believe that it's a piece of entertainment as well as being a documentary that has a message. It's entertainment. It's funny, and it's something that deserves to be seen in theaters, and it's a real theatrical experience. We believe that. And so we decided that although it's a risk, it's a calculated and smart risk. And we, but you got to just take the jump and do it, which is what we did.
So based on the success of this, is this now something that, and I know the Daily Wire keeps growing in terms of its offerings, right? That it wants to do more, not just, obviously you guys have a ton of successful podcasts there. and shows, but you've now ventured into theaters. I know there's some children's stuff. What is it that what signal does this send to you about how far and wide you want to expand this?
I think it shows us that, the sky, honestly, the sky is the limit. It's always going to be hardest, the first one, when you get into this space, and you're now, we've made films before. We've made What Is a Woman, as you point out, but now you're like competing against. I mean, it's kind of surreal when you have the film in and you're looking at it and you're competing against like Beetlejuice and Transformers, who of course they grossed way more than we did. It's a tens of millions of dollar budget movie and a big IP and all that, but still, like, that's the world you're in now, is that. And so it's always the most daunting the first time that you do it. But now that we have and we've kind of established that, I certainly think we plan on continuing.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.